Hi, my name is Joel Steinprice, and I'm going to walk you through a little bit about the infographic that I created for the University of Washington iSchool's Summer 2014 Visual Information course. So right here you'll see my final infographic. I'm going to talk in this part a little bit about the goal behind it. I'll talk about the color and typography models. I'll talk about the different pieces of the visual potential that I represented. And then in the second part, I'll go more into the context as well as my layout model, and then tie that together with unity, alignment, and some of the visual hierarchy. So without further ado, here is my final infographic. The goal that I had was to share some of the work that the search teams of Getty Images does. So I wanted to showcase not only the number of tasks they perform, but where they are and the amount of content that they're looking at and how they meet customer needs. So to do this, I used a color model and typography model, as well as a layout model, to kind of pull in pieces that would help me express the information that I wanted to. So let me show you the color model that I used. And here it is. So I'll put the link to this page down below in the comments. But as you can see here, there's a very limited color palette that was used for my color model. If we look a little bit more at the inventory of colors, you can see that it's kind of, the reds and blues make a little bit of a complementary pattern. But if you include the beige, it's more of a split complementary. I decided to follow this very closely. There are some pieces that I don't use. I don't use this kind of darker blue too often. And then I also used some opacity, which you don't see in the color model. Here's that color model again. And then here is the final infographic that I created. So you can see the blues and the reds and beiges that I used here. I did use it to the colors to highlight, so I've got a block here. This was my main focus, and so I wanted to really draw attention to this area. So this part is a lighter beige than the others to kind of help highlight an area. I used encoding. I used reds and blues to mean different region and the different regions search log data. I used encoding through the title to link to the area graph here. I used some color encoding to show the two different sides of this process diagram, where I talk about the prepare and repair sides, as well as the different teams and the tasks that they do. And then finally I used color encoding in the location map to tie together the circles and their corresponding connection to the kind of more appearance-based diagram I have associated with the locations. As far as triggers, there is some triggering that is done through common usage. So from the critiques and from the research that I did, US and UK are often represented in blues and reds, which worked well with my color model. So some of the feedback that I received when I was designing this also followed that people expected to see those colors, and so that's why I represented them in that way and not flipped. And then also there was some kind of triggering. I think this is more psychological, but there's the beige kind of background and the use of lines and the black text and the typography. That all kind of triggers a sense of kind of like a newsprint page. One of the critiques that I received said that it reminded them of a newspaper. So it's kind of triggering that association. But overall, the tone, and I think this is probably due to the split complementary color scheme, it's pretty calm. I'm using some moderately saturated colors, and then I am also using some very bright colors through the opacity. and through the white lines here. But because of the split complementary kind of color scheme with the beiges and the reds and oranges being all kind of in that same little general wedge, it's not quite so jarring to the viewer. We've got the blue areas so that you don't fall asleep while you're looking at the, at the infographic. So let me talk a little bit more about the typography that I used. So as you can see in my infographic, there's very few fonts that are used. I've got a Times New Roman that is bold and italics for some of the titles and descriptive components, and then I use one called Euro Style, which is for more of the labels and some of the precision markings, more of the data components. And I used the same model here for my typography model. So you can see they do the same thing. It's not the exact same font set, but I'm using Adobe Illustrator CS4, and this was as close as I could match. But you can see that they kind of scrunch things together. So I followed that example in my infographic. I pushed words together like in this improving search just to give it that same kind of feel. So going back to my typography, you can see they also use this Euro style for their labels. You might not be able to see it, it's a little bit small. They also use some knockout kind of effects here where they've got a block of color with the text in beige, which I follow in my infographic. And then also some of the text is in a different color, like reds for times, red for these different speeds here. So let's talk a little bit about that. I'm trying to get back here. Okay, so I do use some of the same effects here. I've got a red where I've got a knockout of this beige for my prepare and repair. I use that same style here with my smaller headings, the content coverage, top searches, and then I do the same thing with my kind of color encoding with the US and UK page searches here. I also do some of the same labeling with the black tabs that come out of the pie charts in this little area. For annotations, you know, I use some of the text here with the Times New Roman, as I was talking about before, kind of the descriptive components to the text, the titles, and then also the information that's going on within each of the diagrams. As far as precision, I use that sparingly. I've got some information here in my time diagram that tells you about the number of assets that are coming in. And then I also use it here on my pie charts to give the viewer not only that visual sense, but also to actually give them the precise number of for percentage of searches that are based either in the UK or US search logs. So let me go through the different pieces. We had 5 different components that we were asked to express. So I've got them here. I've got some number pieces over on this right-hand side. I've got some time pieces here. I've got a location piece here and a relationship piece here, and then there's some appearance components that are also throughout this image. So let's break it down a little bit, and let me get into some of my number pieces. So here I've used a line graph. Let's see if I can help make this a little bit more visible. Okay, I've got a line graph over here that breaks down the different searches over time, and I've grouped this number component with my pie chart, which is also another number component down here. I've used in both of these the color encoding to represent the US and UK, where US is blue, UK is red. I also use some color encoding down in this pie chart area that I'm not sure is quite as effective. If you can look at my color model, you'll see that there's these kind of circular arcs that take over the majority of the screen, and it's really lovely. So what they've done is they use length to indicate the amount of kilometers that the light rail train travels, and then the thickness of the arc is the speed at which the fast trains travel. So for my infographic, I do the same thing with length. You know, that's kind of part and parcel with a pie graph. But then I use thickness to represent the majority stakeholder. So you'll see that, you know, these are the U.S. top 3 searches, and as you'd expect, the blue pieces are thicker because they make up the majority of the searches on that topic between the 2 different regions. On the right-hand side, those are the UK, and you'll see down here this blue section indicates that even though this search for Gaza is one of the top 3 UK searches in July of 2014, the US actually still outnumbered it with the number of page views. So I'm not quite sure that this is effective. It does strongly represent or reflect the visual components of the color model with dotted lines and color blocks. And it's an interesting breakup from all these different lines, but I'm not sure that the 2 different types of encoding worked as strongly as it could have. So then my next part here is my time piece. This is this large kind of area chart. So what you'll see here is the amount of content that's coming in and how the search teams look at that. And it's broken down by month down the side of the area graph, and then the number of assets is the x-axis. So this is my time component. I'll show you how it relates to the layout model in the second part. I also use time to a lesser extent in this numbers piece over here too, where I've got searches over time and how they increase and decrease. But I think this is probably a little bit more effective as a numbers component because of the short scale of time, and then also the focus on the number of searches instead of this passage through time. So my next piece is the location component. Let me see if I can zoom in here. So this was a tricky one. I've been doing revisions on that basically until my final my final turn-in, my final submission. What I'm attempting to showcase is where the different search teams are and how, sorry, this is a little bit lagged, how the coverage handles over the course of 24 hours. So what I've got, I'm using some kind of common color triggering here where I've got a shape that kind of represents the night time. The feedback that I got, people seem to recognize that pretty immediately. Sorry, this is a little bit wonky now. And then I use some additional color encoding where I've represented the circles where the offices are for each of my search teams. And then I have a appearance component along the bottom that shows the figures that actually give you that kind of precision count if you're interested. So you know that Seattle has 6 people, Asheville has 1, Mumbai has 20 people. You can count those out with these kind of abstract icons. Some of the other ways that I tried to tie it together were with this orange band that kind of crosses the entire location, and that also is supposed to kind of represent this idea that there's a consistent connection between all the different groups. I think that there probably would be a better way to express this. You know, I think what happened is I would keep on going back and forth between adding too much specificity and then too little. So it was a really hard thing to balance. So some of the things that I think could be improved are tying these diagram figures down here closer to what the circles are, so that there's a stronger connotation than just the color encoding that these two are related. For my final piece, I used the relationship diagram. So that is kind of the highlight of this infographic. I'm trying to get this up here as well. And this was also challenging. I didn't want to simplify it too much. I wanted to express all the different things that the teams do. I also wanted to allow the viewer to kind of grasp fairly quickly what was also going on here. So the idea that, oh, these are the tasks. I can spend more time if I want to, or I can just see it for what it is. So how I did that was I used these kind of annotations here with Times New Roman to help give the viewer a quick kind of reference to what I was trying to express. I also used some appearance elements here. I used the hand with a sponge to kind of represent the cleanup process. I used a pen for the vocabulary development, and then I used these kind of text bubbles, speech bubbles, to represent translation down below. So I used some visual components as well. I wanted to highlight a beginning stage, so this prepare versus a repair section, and I used color to do that. And then the other piece that I mentioned before was just kind of like drawing the eye, not only through the highlighted background, but the scale of this piece. Let's see if I can zoom out here. This is definitely the largest piece of the infographic, so just the size alone. Let me see if I can make this a little bit easier to read here. The size of this piece alone is basically the dominant component to this infographic. This is another really tricky one because it is so internal, making sure that people that are outside of maybe the search teams would be able to understand the different pieces. There are some pieces that I think are very internal jargon, so the idea of disambiguation. It's doubtful that somebody outside of the search teams or Getty would understand what that means. Some of the other words like content, what is content for somebody that's outside of Getty? So, my goal was to create an infographic for an internal person, but then I think that I might still have been able to simplify this enough that an external person that's looking at this might have been able to gather more information if I would have used a different terminology, but then that would have taken away from the value to internal teams. So again, like these are the different 5 different pieces. Time is kind of here in the middle, numbers, location, the kind of relationship piece, and then the appearance pieces that are tied throughout. Thank you for listening to part 1, and I will see you in part 2.